Hello and welcome to Lexi's Book Nook. I am your host, Lexi, where we talk about all things book club recommendations and books, book reviews, and some of March's biggest books. If you're listening on YouTube, then you are seeing my booktube, Lexi's Book Nook. You're able to see my face, book nook, and the book covers. If you're listening on Spotify, you don't have this feature. You have all this content for free. But I do have a Patreon page as well where you can subscribe for $3 a month to see my face, my book nook, and the book covers. It's still the same content. If you join me on BookTube or YouTube, you also get access to bonus episodes where you will get different books that are not discussed on my usual Spotify episodes. So they're all called Lexi's Book Nook on Spotify, Patreon, and BookTube. I also have a website, lexisbooknook.com, that is spelled Lexie, where you can see all those books that are laid out from January to March, summary, book review, and there's also a little bookshop where you can buy your own copy of the books that are discussed on the episodes and on my website. So we are going to jump in pretty soon. So if you are a listener, you know we have 2 episodes per month, one at the beginning and one at the end. On the beginning of the month, I'll just do a quick episode of the books I'll be reading for the month and what to look forward to for the end of the month, where I will actually go over a summary, my thoughts on the books, and some book club discussion questions. So if you listen to the beginning of the month, you know what books we're going to go over. If not, I'm going to go over them real quick. I have 2 book club recommendations, one for the Cockeysville Library in Baltimore County and one back at home in Bel Air, Maryland, Books on Tap, where there are books that are recommended and a group of us get together once a month and we get a couple of drinks and discuss the book. I'll also discuss Reese Witherspoon book club recommendations, and then after that, if I get through all of them, I will go over books on my TBR list that needs to be read, and that I'm going to try to keep in theme with the month as much as possible, or I'll discuss why I picked it. And then those bonus episodes are books that are beyond the books mentioned on the podcast. So the first book for the Cockeysville Baltimore County Public Library Book Club, it is All the Children Are Home by Patri Francis. If you're on BookTube and Patreon, you're able to see the content, and here is the book cover. So that is the first book we'll be discussing. The next one, this is a twofer, like a 2-for-1. It's for the Bel Air Books on Tap, and it's also a Reese Witherspoon pick called Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng. I'm not going to try to pronounce it and butcher it, but this is the second book. The next one is another Reese Witherspoon book. I do not have the cover for it because I actually read it last year before I made it big, and it's now on a TV show on Amazon Prime. Is Daisy Jones and the Six, so I don't have a cover for my booktubers and Patreon, but I'm sure you have seen it. Maybe you're watching it. I am on Lent and I gave up TV, so I will be watching it after Easter. The next book is a Reese Witherspoon pick as well, The Club. This was her pick for March of 2022, so my Reese Witherspoon picks are going to be from the year prior. So this is The Club. And then the last book I'll be going over is 3 Wishes by Leah Moriarty. I thought this was fitting because it's for 3. We're in the 3rd month of 2023. And also, I love Leah Moriarty, so I'll be trying to discuss authors that I love to read. So those are the 5 books we'll be going over. And I'm going to have my spines faced out so you can see them. And we're going to get started. So I'm going to go into the summary of All the Children Are Home by Patri Francis. The book is set in the late 1950s to 1960s in Claxton, Massachusetts. All the Children Are Home follows the Mascatelli family. Dahlia and Louise are the foster parents, and their long-term foster children, Jimmy, Zadie, and John. The story is about the changes in their lives when the 6-year-old Indigenous girl, Agnes, comes to live with them. In my thoughts, I have so much love for these children and the situation that they're in, because my dad was a foster child. He was the youngest of 6 children, like no more than 6 children in the home. The older 3 in my parents' household were like the problem children, kind of. They'll either ask for money or drugs or just non-existent. They only contact my dad when they need something. So when in my grandparents' house and my dad's house, when children, when they came of age, like 18 years old, they didn't have to stay with my grandparents. They're free to move out if they wanted to. And it's very different than the story in All the Children Are Home. In this book, the story is told in the perspectives of Dahlia, the mom, Jimmy, Zadie, and Agnes. And I really feel for them because these children are so much wiser than their age. And I feel like they grew up too fast, but I feel like that's part of the trauma that's behind foster children. They've been through experience that no children should have to, so like my heart really went out for them. And I think this book is really touching, and it gives you insight on the foster system. And so my experience, or my dad's experience, is very different than the children taken into the Moscatelli house. But the bond that the children have in the book are just drew me to each one of them, and I really liked each of the children. So now we're going to go into the discussion questions. I'm just going to go into like 3 questions per book, just to keep it kind of short. So the first question is, after enduring horrific abuse and neglect, Agnes not only survives, she becomes the extraordinary girl/woman we meet in the novel. What character traits allow her to overcome so much? Have you ever known anyone like that? And there were a lot of traits that the book club and myself came up with. For Agnes, she was also a swimmer, so I think it was her basic instinct to survive, her determination and perseverance, and these traits transfer over from swimming to real life. So I think those traits helped her survive so much experiences that she shouldn't have to. And the book club also mentioned that she was very observant, she was resilient, approachable, and open to love. There is a scene in the book where Agnes stood up on the kitchen chair and shouted out that she loved everyone in the room, or how much she loved Jimmy. She was just so open and willing to give out her this love. I think that made her so approachable and loving. So she had that spark and that fire that kept her going, and I think that love really helped her to survive so much. She had a big heart. So this is part 1 of the number 1 question, the first question for this, because I think the next one kind of goes hand in hand, which is, Agnes is stalked by Mr. Dean both in her mind and for many years. Why does he refuse to let her go? And how does she ultimately free herself from him? So I took it as Mr. Dean is this real person, because otherwise how would she have broken her arm when she first came into the house? So I think he refused to let her go because he wanted what he couldn't have, since Agnes was now part of the foster system and going home with the Moscatellis. Or he enjoyed having that power over her. But there was one instinct in particular when Agnes thought she saw him at one of her swim practices, really. And one of the girls in my book club thought that maybe Mr. Dean is more of a hallucination, and that's why he's in her mind so much. And like he's just this one-dimensional villain that we don't really know, but we have to assume that Agnes is right about him. But I think he's a real person. Agnes came to the Moscatelli house with a broken arm and a cast, so maybe we don't really know the full story behind like how she broke her arm. But I'm assuming that Mr. Dean is this real person, and Jimmy did beat him up at one point, so he very much exists. But maybe Agnes is this unreliable narrator, and she sees him in these places, and he's really not. So I think he's a physical and like a spiritual being in her case. Like he was there to abuse her in the past, but in the present, I think he's more either trying to haunt her, or he's not really there at all. And I think that's affected her mental state. So that's a very interesting question, and I really wanted to bring it up to you guys, because that was a really good one that the book club came together to answer. So that and the first one kind of blend together because it's all about Agnes. The second question is, the foster care system has changed greatly since the 50s and 60s when the novel is set. For one thing, they were far less likely to terminate parental rights in those days. Do you think it has improved or gotten worse? So it's really hard for me to say if it's gotten worse or not. My dad was adopted probably in the 60s, mid 60s. So it's most likely the same of what the book has right now. I can't tell if the 50s and 60s differentiate a lot, and I can't really tell if the foster system has gotten any better. But based on like some of the experiences that the girls in my book club mentioned, even in the current times, it's still not as improved. There's a lot of children with a lot of trauma, a lot of baggage, and a lot of difficulties in learning and adapting to their environment. So, based on what my book club was saying, no, I don't think that it has improved. I think it's maybe the same or worse. It's hard to tell. I'm not really involved with that process or don't really know much about it. And that's what drew me into this book so much because it made me more aware about the foster system. So I think that's a good question to keep it open for my audience to let me know your experience. Are you a foster parent? Have you fostered any children? Do you work with foster children? Let me know what your thoughts are on that question. And you can always contact me on my website, lexisbooknook.com. But we're going to go into the third and final question for this book, but keep that in mind. You can always answer any of these discussion questions by visiting my website, and you can contact me there. So the last question for this book is, in keeping with the central theme in the novel, the story ends with the unanswered questions foster children often live with. What became of John? He was like the baby of the family. Did he ever read Zadie's letters? And where is Maud Marie, which is Agnes's little sister? Do the records tell the truth about her? Would you be interested in reading a sequel about these characters? So I really don't want to spoil the ending or any parts of the book because I want my audience to read or listen to it because I think it is a good book to, again, be aware about the foster system. But John was taken care of by his biological father. He came back into the story much later and gave Zadie the choice to either stay with the Moscatelli family or come with him and John. And Zadie chose to live with the Moscatelli family. But we don't really know what happened to John during his custody. He could be a very different person. He may have read Zadie's letters, or maybe not. He was really mad at Zadie had the freedom to choose to stay or go. But so he may not have read them out of spite. So we don't really know. But I kind of spoiled something for you, but it's open to interpretation too if we think John ever reads Zadie's letters because she wrote to him to let her know what's going on in her life, what's going on with the Moscatelli family, how much she misses him, and wants to hear from him how he's doing. But we don't really know if John has read them or not. And as for Maud Marie, I personally think that she's dead. She was born with an intellectual disability, so I think it's very hard for her to adapt from foster to a new family, and with her internal challenges and biological challenges, and just based off what Agnes describes her, I don't think that she survives, and she seemed to be very frail. So, and I do want to believe that the records are accurate. Now we're also assuming that the foster care system is flawed, so maybe the records aren't right. Maybe they are, but I'm going to assume that they are. So I think the records tell the truth about Maud Marie, but I would be interested in a sequel of this book to see all the children grow up, and especially to see John again. So those are the 3 questions for All the Children Are Home. If you want to look at the cover one more time, here it is from my BookTubers and Patreon account and my Patreon fans. So that is the cover and the book on All the Children Are Home. So the next question or next book is Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng, or NG. I don't know how it's pronounced. This is my Books on Tap book, my Bel Air book club. So I'm going to go over the summary. Our Missing Hearts explores a fictional dystopian world where Chinese Americans are casted as outcasts and books are burned. 12-year-old Noah, also known as Bird, Gardner, lives with his father, a former linguist who now shelves books in a university library. For a decade, their lives have been governed by laws to preserve American culture in the wake of a crisis, economic instability, and increased violence. Bird has grown up not knowing much about his rebellious mother, her work, or what happened to her. But when he receives a mysterious letter from her, he is compelled to find her. So my thoughts. I thought this was a very interesting book, especially in the wake of COVID-19. I think it shows what could have happened post-COVID. A lot of Americans blame China and the Chinese Americans for starting and spreading COVID-19 among the country. So, I mean, personally, I don't. but I think this shows like a dystopian world where Americans blame Chinese and they post this stigmatism and hatred towards them. But this book also has the added effect of taking children as a means of political control. Even though it was explained in the author's notes, I still don't fully understand the reason for taking innocent children away from everything they know, home, family, and love. I don't see how this is going to benefit the government. So if you read this book, go to the author's note and read her notes on the book. I read it, but like I don't see the point of taking children. I think it's a cruel, cruel thing to do. And it really struck a nerve for me. I thought the book was also beautifully written, and it reminded me a lot of The Handmaid's Tale in the dystopian sense, while also standing out as being its own work. I'm not a fan of not using quotation marks in the dialogue of the book, which was that technique used in Our Missing Hearts. But other than that, I really like this book, and there's some really good discussion questions. Unfortunately, our book club is not meeting at this time due to just renovations and other stuff going on. And so I'm going to go over my answers to these discussion questions. The first one is, what are your thoughts about the way the U.S. is presented in the novel, and what similarities do you see to our version? Do you view the story as dystopian fiction? So I think the main similarities are just like how COVID affects the U.S. Americans, Chinese and Chinese Americans, and the stigmatism and hate. There is some hate right now towards China and Chinese Americans, but not to the extent that the book takes it. The book really exaggerates and it expands on it and creates a more dystopian world. So yes, I do see it as dystopian fiction. Yes, it could be true, but I think it's more of an exaggeration of what is currently going on. Maybe I'm wrong and I'm oblivious or ignorant to what's really going on in the social media and in politics, and there is a lot of hatred, and maybe some of these things are actually happening in the U.S., but not that I know of. So I think there are some similarities. The next question is, why did Bert embark on this journey to find his mother? What answers did he hope to find? So he started to forget things about her before he received the card and really wanted to know more about his mother. He kind of forgot why she's not in his life, what happened to her, why did she leave, why can't he talk about her to his dad, where is she? So I think he had all these questions and he was afraid to ask his dad. So that's why he really wanted to find her to get these answers. And he's at this age where he's more independent and can find these on his own. So that's a very short one. The next question is, the government considers Margaret, his mom, a threat, and she has to leave the family immediately without a truly proper goodbye to Bert. Do you feel like Margaret was left with no choice? So she left because she had written some poetry as part of her passion in her work, and it turned into this book called Our Missing Hearts. And her work got misinterpreted as advocacy and starting a rebellion, and just like sparked riots and all this additional crisis to the setting. And it's not her intention, but it got out of hand to the point that it was going to affect the safety of her family. So I think she did have to leave. I think it's tricky, especially as a mother, but she wanted to protect her family. She wanted to protect her child. And I think she left knowing that when Bert is of age and old enough to understand, he will come find her. So yes, I do think she left without a choice, despite everything that's going on in her current history with her family and people out to get her, like taking this meaning of behind her poetry to a greater extent in the hopes that Bert will find her again. So those are the three questions for Our Missing Hearts. If you want to look at the cover, here's your one last look for my booktubers and Patreon fans. Sorry for the glare. And we're going to move on to our next book, which is Daisy Jones and the Six. So again, I don't have the cover art with me just because it's from the past and I've already read it, listened to it. I actually listened to it as an audiobook, and it's so much better that way. I think it was written to be an audiobook. because it was really, really good. So I actually did not have like a summary, like a full out summary for like I did with my first two books, but it's really about Daisy Jones as a single artist and the Six, a single band, and how they are formed individually and then how they grow to be Daisy Jones and the Six. It is written like a documentary and through the perspectives of all the band members and Daisy Jones, how they came to fame and how they fell out of it. So it's really the rise and fall of Daisy Jones and the Six, rise and fall of Daisy, the rise and fall of the Six, and then rise and fall of Daisy Jones and the Six. And the so I'm going to go right into my thoughts, and it is written like a documentary, like I said, through the perspectives of every character, and the voice actors were amazing. They did a really good job differentiating the characters. I never got confused once like they do in some audiobooks. They really told the story. I really got the personality. I got the traits. I got the struggles for each character. I thought it was really, really well done, and I'm very excited to watch the TV show. Plus, in future episodes, I will discuss books that are adapted to TV series or movies because I think it's a great way to preserve our literary our books, reading all of it, especially for those who don't like to read. So I'm going to talk more about those kind of books later, but we're going to get into Daisy Jones and the Six and her discussion questions. The author, Reed, chose to tell the story in an unconventional format. What did you think of the interview format? So I just kind of mentioned that in my thoughts, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. I loved it. I loved the perspective of every character. I love the documentary aspect. I think it really shines a light on how it can be a TV series. The next question is, at one point, Daisy says, I had absolutely no interest in being somebody else's muse. I am not a muse. I am the somebody. End of the effing story. So what do you think she means by this? Do you agree with her? Is there sexism in the mere notion of muse? So I think going to the last question, I think maybe there is some sexism originally with the notion of muse. In past times, the muse is usually a woman, but not to say that men can't be a muse. But I'm going to say yes, there is some sexism. But I think what Daisy means by this is that she does not want to be the model for future work, for future music, for lyrics and songwriting. She wants to be that somebody. She wants to be the first and only, the original. She doesn't want to be someone that other singer-songwriters can compare to. She wants to be the biggest star she can be, understandably so, because I think every artist wants to be the best they can be and the best ever. And then the last question, Daisy abuses drugs throughout her life. Why do you think she turned to drugs? Do you think she was using drugs to fill a void in her life? And if so, what was the void? And yes, she was definitely using drugs to fill a void in her life because she had a lack of family and friends and belonging. She had like one good friend, but she was kind of like on and off again, not very communicative, didn't really stay in touch with the people that were most connected to her life. So I think she got really lonely and dependent on the drugs to make her feel something and feeling like she belonged or felt like she was loved. So I think that's why she didn't really get close to anybody or confide in people, and the drugs were the one thing that gave her purpose. It's also a way I think she used. I think she used drugs as a survival tactic for all the traumas in her life, for not having a family, for not having connections, for having like toxic relationships in the past. I think she depended on drugs. And I think she just really relied on it, and which caused her addiction. But I didn't want to go into too much of these discussion questions that I have from like book clubs because they will go into like your thoughts about different relationships and what happens to certain relationships. And I don't want to spoil it because I really want you to read the book. Mainly listen to it and then watch the TV series. So I don't want to go into too much details. I want to touch on it. I want you guys to get interested. I want to spark an interest. That way you can get involved with it. So that is Daisy Jones and the Six. The next book is another Reese Witherspoon book called The Club. So this is her March pick from 2022. And we're going to dive right in. And I don't have a summary, but it is about these two brothers, Adam and Ned, who create this prestigious club around the world, mainly for the celebrities, a place for them to get away, and so that they don't have to scribble around for a hotel. They can get the best of the best hotels, and it's called The Club, and about how it's actually crumbling, not like physically, but financially. So it's go over how it was structured and also the fall of this prestigious club. So I wasn't like a huge fan of this book. I did listen to this as an audiobook, but it didn't catch my attention like 100%, but I did think it was interesting. It's more like a thriller, in the sense that there was a murder mystery involved in all this, and that's part of the reason why the club is failing, because they don't want to have that stigmatism, I guess, and have that name that the club is tainted by this murder. But like, I think I will touch it who got murdered, but I don't want to spoil the surprise. So I liked it and I didn't like it. I thought it was interesting about the celebrity status and like how they can get away from the world, and I liked the thriller aspect of it, but it was very different for a Reese Witherspoon pick. So the first question I'm going to go into is Adam Groom sees himself as being his brother's equal. Do you think that's true? How do you think the two brothers differ? Why does Adam want to leave the company, and do you think Ned loves Adam? So that's a lot of questions in the first one. But no, I don't think that Adam and Ned are equal. It seems that Ned had more power and decision-making opportunities than his brother. Granted, I think Ned purposely took that role from Adam and assumed that he had the higher position, and he's also the older brother. But I think Adam is not as much of a pushover, but more laid back. He sees things through, but he isn't aggressive about his decisions like Ned is, and his behavior towards his deal and transactions are more relaxed. He's also more of a family man, which leads into the next question that I'll get into, of this one main question. But Adam's wife wanted him to leave the company. Adam has been more married to his job than his family. Based on the conversation between Adam and his wife, it was time for him to make his own decisions and focus on his family. Sorry, that pause. I got confused for a second. His wife never said it's either me or the job, but she didn't have to. Adam wanted to do what's best for him and his wife and his family and think about retirement. He didn't want to lose his family, and it seemed that he really enjoyed the prospect of spending more time away from work. And then the last question of that one, no, I don't think Ned loves Adam. It seemed like he tolerated him more than anything. I didn't get the sense that Ned respected his brother or his decisions. And his lasting remark was from Adam, is when Adam said he was leaving the company, and this was, "I'll see you at Christmas." So when Adam said he was leaving, that's what Ned said. And I don't think that's very understanding or kind, but no, I don't really think that Ned loves Adam. All right, so the next question, consider the name of the resort company, Home. What is home? In what ways do the home resorts provide these qualities or not? In what ways, intentionally or not, might the name be ironic? So I can tell you the actual definition of home because I Googled it. I want to be like precise and then differentiate to what I thought what home meant. So according to the dictionary, home is a space used as a permanent or semi-permanent residence for one or many humans. But I think home should be somewhere where you feel you're most comfortable and happiest, somewhere where you can make lasting memories, and a place where you feel like you belong. So in some ways, the home resort is an actual home. It's a place of permanence and belonging, but is it really a place where you feel you're most comfortable? Do you feel like you can relax there? Maybe maybe some people can, maybe not. I don't get the vibe that the home is meant to be a forever home. So I think it's more like a play on words, and it is ironic. Um, and the last one, I'm gonna go into a little bit of like the murder mystery a little bit. What allows the rich and powerful to get away with potentially criminal behavior? Think about Nikki and Jess's stories, two characters in the book. So read the book so you know who they are. How are the people who harm them shielded from consequences? So being wealthy can definitely make it much easier to navigate the system and come out of it um, unscathed. The rich can get away with crime because lawyers are expensive, so the rich can afford it. Bail is often unattainable by the poor, and rich people can use their affluence as a defense. It's very unfortunate and very saddening, and it's very cruel and unfair, but resources aren't always available to all individuals. So I wanted to touch this question because there is a crime performed by the rich, and I think that's a good moral theme to think about when reading this book. So I'm going to leave it on that and give you guys a chance to read the book. And you can also answer my questions on lexisbooknook.com. But here we're going to close out with the book, the club. Here's the cover one last time. And we're going to go into the last book, which is Three Wishes by Leanne Moriarty. So I mentioned that she's one of my favorite authors. So I'm going to try to read more of her, try to match them with the best appropriate month. So I chose this one because of three wishes. We're in the month of March, and March is the third month of the year. So we are going to dive right in. So in this novel, we follow the Kettle sisters, Lynn, Kat, and Gemma. These 30-year-old triplets are always together and draw attention to themselves, but apart, each sister deals with her own share of ups and downs. We follow these sisters through their 33rd year before their birthday as they deal with sibling rivalry, secrets, revelations, relationships, unfaithful husbands, life-changing decisions, and the hilarious yet frustrating life of forever being part of a trio. So my thoughts, I don't know if I like these stories more as individuals or as a group, like these sisters. They're all relatable and funny in their own way. And they're amazing individuals with their own traumas. However, they don't tell each other everything, which is very aggravating because they're so close and yet they don't say everything. Maybe it's healthy that they don't have to because they already know each other very well. But I thought that was very frustrating. And they all have a secret that they try to hide from each other. But I don't feel like that's the best way to heal and find support. But together, the sisters are a hoot. They are hilarious and they're very fun. I wish I had sisters who were like them. I'm not saying I don't love my sisters. No, I'm not saying that. But I think Lynn, Kat, and Gemma are hilarious. Their adventures are fun and they are so loving to each other. It is a bit of a heavy book. There are some like traumatic experiences in here, but it's always introduced with some humor. So I think it's a fun read. The first question I'm going to get into is why did Gemma never tell her sisters, with whom she shared everything, about the abuse from her fiancé? What would her sisters have done had they known? How does this affect your understanding of why Gemma lives her life the way she does? And I think Gemma decided not to tell her sisters because she knows they would have gotten involved. They would have encouraged and pressed her to leave her fiance, or they would personally get involved in the situation. Like the summary states, each sister is their own being apart from each other. They have their own lives and they want to deal with certain situations on their own. I'm sure Gemma didn't want to trouble her family and take care of the situation herself. But the abuse from her fiance explains Gemma's personality throughout the story. Gemma can't hold a relationship longer than 6 months, or she chooses not to. But I think she chooses to end the relationships because it's at a point when she starts to develop feelings and she gets scared. So she doesn't want anything long term and risk getting in a similar situation with her last long term relationship with her ex fiance. Going into the next sister, Lynn. Ultra organized and efficient, Lynn begins to experience panic attacks. Why does she hide them from her sisters and her husband? How are the panic attacks a message to Lynn about changes she needs to make? Similar to Gemma, Lynn probably didn't want to worry her sisters, or she wanted to take charge of her life like she normally does. She's a very stereotypical type A, very organized and structured. She seems to be the most independent as well, and the most likely to take charge of situations. She knows what she wants and she gets it. It reflects in her success with her business. And I think the panic attacks are a sign that she can't control everything. She can't do everything. She needs support and help, and she's not used to asking for it. But it takes her most of the book to realize this and that it's okay to confide in her family and husband. And the last question, we're not going to go into Cat, but humor runs throughout Three Wishes. It endears us to the characters and provides a buffer to some of the heavier issues that arise in the story. How would this story be different if the author had not used humor as effectively? If the author didn't use humor, this would indeed be a very heavy book to read. It contains domestic abuse, mental health issues, and sibling rivalry. These can be touchy topics for certain individuals, so it's just a warning. If you have experienced any of these situations, rape, domestic abuse, panic attacks, this might be a trigger book. You might not want to read it. But the humor is mostly focused on Gemma. There is humor throughout the book, so it makes it lighter and more easier to read. But I think Gemma was my favorite character because she's more relatable to me. The humor is to keep the book light and more enjoyable, and also to realize the power of family and sisterly love. So I think it was a fun book to read. For the heavy topics that are discussed, like I mentioned, maybe consider that before reading the book. It might be a trigger book, so you might not want to read it. But there is humor throughout it, so that is Three Wishes. I said this is the last book, and I realized from my other script we have one more, which is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. She is the author of also Gone Girl. I'm going to pull up the art for that because I have it on my phone. So for my Patreon users and booktubers, here is the cover art. And this is also a TV series, so that is why I chose it for March. In the summary, reporter and protagonist Camille Krieger is assigned to write a story on the murders of two girls. One was murdered the year prior, the other just recently missing. The story of these murders forces Camille to reluctantly return home after 8 years of her last visit. As Camille works to uncover the truth about these violent crimes, she finds herself forced to unravel the psychological puzzle of her own past. So if you've noticed the theme, I like thrillers. I also like true crime. But thriller, true crime set aside, this book has been made into a TV series, so I highly recommend watching it. It is on my list of TV shows to watch. So my thoughts, this, like I said, is a true crime, so it's right up my alley. It was like a true crime story with a psychological twist. The psychological thriller was intriguing and frustrating because the police could not find any leads, and I feel like that's very, based on the true crime podcast I listened to, shout out to Murder, my favorite murder, I'm not morbid, true crime junkies. Anyway, there are situations where the police cannot find any details, they can't find any evidence or any leads, and it's very frustrating. This book was just like that. It just seemed like the police were dragging their feet to solve this case. All the characters were quirky in their own way, but hard to get attached to. But I guess we would get that from the dark book like this. The ending was not quite what I expected. It definitely threw me for a loop, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. So, Find Out Who the Murderer Is by buying your copy on lexisbooknook.com. And we're going to get into my questions. Why did Camille write words on herself? So, another trigger warning, if you have experience with cutting yourself or know somebody who does this might be a trigger book for you. So Camille was never officially diagnosed, but she certainly sounded like she had anxiety, possibly from high school or college years. Whenever anyone said anything slightly meaningful, Camille had the compulsion to write it down. She started writing everything down in a notepad, but eventually graduated to her skin. And after time, it was not just writing, but carving the words on herself. And then after her sister Marion died, she started cutting and carving them, obviously on her skin. The next question. The two girls who were kidnapped and murdered had their teeth missing. Could this signify anything? And at first, I thought the killer had a fetish, but later in the book, it was mentioned that the little girls, Anne and Natalie, were biters, and they had a temper. So whenever they had a temper tantrum, they would bite. The killer must have had known these girls and that they were biters, and maybe the extraction was a punishment for them to stop biting. But they probably had died before the extraction. But maybe the killer was a biter too. So who could it be? I'm going to leave that up to you because this is hinted in the book by certain characters. And then the last question, did you think the killer was a man or a woman, and why? without spoiling the book, I thought the killer was a man at first. I think that's a stereotypical thinking that most murderers are men. However, there was one witness who said that he saw a woman take Natalie. That's when my thinking shifted. I know it's just a kid saying this, so they don't have the most accurate memory. They might be an unreliable reliable narrator, but I want to go by facts. So I will believe these witness until proven wrong. So I thought it was a man until that kid witness saw a woman. So those are all the questions. Those are all the books. That is the last one, Sharp Objects. So you can access these books on my website, lexisbooknook.com, LAXIE. And you can see my summary, my thoughts. My discussion questions aren't there. So tune into Spotify and Patreon so you can get that book club aspect of it. And on my website, you can also buy your own copy on the bookshop tab. I will get a small commission based off your sales, but at no extra cost to you. If you continue to listen on Spotify, feel free to. I also have a Patreon account for $3 a month where you can see my face, my book nook, get inspiration for your own, and see the book covers. I know some viewers may love to look at covers, so take advantage of Patreon and BookTube. BookTube, you have the extra benefit of getting bonus episodes that are not mentioned on my podcast. So if you're interested, please subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Patreon. And we are going to finish up for the month of March. And I hope you guys keep listening and I hope you keep on reading.